here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back in to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. Pat and Scott looking to wind down our preseason prognostications. We're finishing up part 2 of our wide receiver ranking disparities. Again, Pat and I go through our usual minutia of why or why not we lean a certain way for somebody. Again, we rank our players just like everybody else and turn around for reasons that are beknownst to us and then share why maybe we agreed on a lot. But we tend to look at the bigger picture of why Pat was a lot higher on somebody, I was a lot lower, and what rationales that we use to determine why, if it's something stats-based, if it's, a gut feeling or something in between. Again, we know a lot of folks out there in the fantasy profession tend to do that, but it never hurts to do that yourself. Even if you're just an avid player, to take a look at different players and start to think about reasons why you like this guy or don't like them based on a trade or a draft pick that may be affecting their status. So we're going to finish out our rankings and get through the wide receiver position. We got 5 guys we're going to talk about. Before we get started, Pat, welcome back in. Getting ready for season 2. I've really enjoyed last year, and I'm looking forward to this year with you as well.
Yeah, we every year when we go through and do our rankings, like you said, we're kind of off on a few guys here and there. We generally are pretty close in most instances, but the wide receivers and running backs, because there are so many of them and there are so many situations where this guy might be starting and this guy's in a backup role, or this guy's the wide receiver 1 and, this guy's going to be playing out of the slot. So, as we get information throughout the preseason, we tend to, we update our rankings every so often and kind of make sure that we're, where we want to be as far as, going into a draft where you're ranking these guys and where you're going to be taking them. Because, as we've said before, the draft isn't where you win the league, but it can definitely be where you lose the league. If you do not draft yourself with enough assets to win some games or at least make some trades, then you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. So, we go through our rankings and sort of, why we have guys ranked where they are. And like Scott said, some of it may just be, personal opinion. Some of it may be numbers that we've dug into ourselves. Some of it may be arguments that we've heard from someone else or, have had with, other avid fantasy football players or whatever. But some of it is also the level of risk that you're willing to take. And I think when you get into this wide receiver, the range that we're going to be getting into, which is our wide receivers 31 through 50. So this is like your wide receiver 3-4 range. These are the guys that can really help to bolster your lineup when you have an injury, or if you can grab one of these guys, maybe some of the guys that we're talking about here today that have this, potential. We talked a little bit about Amon-Ra St. Brown on the last episode, and he's the type of guy who has the potential to have a really big season. Scott obviously thinks he's going to. I think that it might be a little bit more modest, but that's sort of the guys that you want to target in this range when you're getting into your wide receiver 30 through 50. You're generally in the end of the middle to the back half, basically, of your draft. And these are guys that you are going to want to take upside shots on. By this point, you probably already have most of your starting lineup drafted. Some people, may have a tight end, a quarterback, neither, both. It really depends. But when it comes to your wide receivers and your running backs, a lot of these guys are going off the board quickly. So when you get to this back half, what you want are guys that are going to be able to turn into league winners rather than guys who are just going to, plod along and get you 8 points per week and, not really do a whole lot. So those types of players are what helps you win leagues, because if they do hit, great. You've drafted a great player, somebody that you could plug into your wide receiver 2 or give you a huge advantage in the flex position every week. If they end up busting, who cares? You spent, a 10th or 11th round pick on them or something like that. You just drop them and you pick up, whoever the new hotness is on the waiver wire for that next week. It's easy to sort of cut bait with a lot of these guys that you're not really, that aren't producing for you early in the season. So what we're going to do is, like I said, go over our wide receiver 31 through 50. We'll give you the ranks real quick, and then we'll jump into a couple guys that we're different on, and we'll talk a little bit about why we're different, same as we did, basically with the rest of them. We're not doing anything different. This is the same crap that you've been listening to for the last 4 weeks if you've been listening to our podcast. So we're just going to do it the same way. There's no point in explaining it all over again. Let's just get into it.
Wide receivers.
So our wide receiver 31 is Drake London, 32 Treylon Burks, Adam Thielen, Gabe Davis at 34, Devonta Smith 35, Elijah Moore is 36, Chris Godwin 37, Chris Olave 38, Tyler Lockett 39, Devontae Parker is 40, Alan Lazard 41, Brandon Ayuk is 42, Hunter Renfrow 43, Christian Kirk 44, DeAndre Hopkins is 45, Kadarius Toney at 46, Garrett Wilson at 47, Robert Woods 48, Chase Claypool 49, and the top 50 ends with Sky Moore. And so we're going to jump right into our first guy that we're, again, anybody that we're ranked, that we have ranked basically 10 spots apart, we're going to take a look at today. And the first guy that we're going to talk about is Gabe Davis for the Buffalo Bills. He's currently going as a wide receiver 32. I have him at 30. Scott has him at 40. And my thing with Gabe Davis is, everybody talks about Gabe Davis and, how basically the whole 200-yard, 4-touchdown playoff game last year has, boosted his ADP and boosted, what people think he's going to do this season. And listen, you can't look at a game like that and not see the potential that this guy has for being a great player in the league. So I'm not saying that my entire argument is based off of that one game, but it does show that he does have the potential to do something like that because, you don't see guys like KJ Osborne or, McCole Hardman, all the hype that he's gotten for the Kansas City Chiefs. He's never put up a 200-yard, 4-touchdown game. So the ability to do something and the probability that it's actually going to be done are two completely different things. But for me, the reason that I like Davis is because he's finally going to have a starting role in one of the league's best offenses. Davis has already had the second most red zone targets of any wide receiver in his draft class behind only Justin Jefferson. And that's with Davis playing less than 75% of snaps. Jefferson averages around 90% of the snaps. He was PFF's 10th highest rated wide receiver last year. And now with the extra 112 targets vacated by Cole Beasley, Davis is on track to potentially explode this year. Honestly, I think wide receiver 30, where I have him, is probably even a little too low. But I can't sit here and say that, Amon-Ra St. Brown hasn't shown me a large enough sample size and then, say that Gabe Davis has. You know what I mean? Like it's obvious that Davis has not proven anything yet. So I kind of have him right in the same range where I have Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's got the talent. I think he's got especially the offense to do it. And I would not be surprised at all if Gabe Davis finished inside the top 15 at wide receiver this year. I obviously can't rank him that high because I don't have the confidence that that's, where I think he's going to finish. But I believe he's got the potential to finish, that high. And me having him at 30, I think is a spot where I'm a little bit ahead of ADP. So I am willing to reach, maybe at the beginning of a round where, he might be going towards the end of that round. I'd be willing to reach and grab Gabe Davis, a little bit early, not too much ahead. I'm not going to, go up into like the third round and draft him or anything like that. But if he's hanging around there in that 5th, 6th round, 7th round area, I may pass on a quarterback like Russell Wilson or, maybe even Jalen Hurts to grab a guy like Gabe Davis, knowing that there's some good quarterbacks available in the following round or whatever. So that's sort of my feel on Davis this year is that Josh Allen already looks for him a ton, already looks for him in the red zone, which is, where fantasy players, period, score most of their points, or at least where the difference is in, where guys finish is generally in the number of touchdowns. So I think Gabe Davis could easily have a 10 to 12 touchdown season and finish in the top 15.
To me, it's kind of one of those I'll believe it when I see it. Is the volume potential there? Yeah, kind of. Looking at like what his role is probably going to be is stepping into more of the Emmanuel Sanders outside wide receiver role. And again, you could be outside, you could be listed as, the X and Y. It doesn't matter. It's just really what, the play calls for. But if that's the case, to me, the targets are going to lean a little bit more into, I don't know, I guess probably something more along the lines of that, you're not getting Cole Beasley's 100 and some odd targets. I don't think that's probably going to happen. I think you're probably looking at maybe like 80 to 90 targets, which is nothing to sneeze at. Last year, we're looking at 63. The previous year, 62. So right now, he's been kind of in that like low to mid 60s range as far as targets go. Little bit of a problem for our buddy Gabe has been, drops and hanging on to the football, making some contested catches here and there. So that does have a little bit to do with it, if he's going to be able to truly step up into that role. Now, to me, I think a lot of people are so high on him from his playoff performance. And I mean, yes, to see somebody come out and have a monster game and think that was, his breakthrough, sure, definitely the potential for it. Enough where, I think people thought in the Buffalo Bills organization that probably, Cole Beasley was a little bit longer in the tooth and things like that. But so was Emmanuel Sanders. And he was, I believe 34 and kind of on the back end of his career, and things didn't quite finish out there. He's not officially retired yet. But again, when you're looking at the starting wideouts for that team, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie's currently listed as the slot. They did bring Jamison Crowder over from the Jets. And for those of you familiar with Jamison Crowder, he was a PPR darling before PPR darlings back in the day with Washington. And for a minute, a little banged up, but with the Jets. He's a guy that is definitely going to probably be a little bit more with McKenzie in that splitting that Beasley role. I think the two of them may share multiple slot duties and things of that nature. Dawson Knox, don't forget about Dawson Knox. Everybody thinks he's going to fall off the face of the earth because of touchdown regression, but he was also a guy that made a lot of big plays downfield, had a lot of first downs. And James Cook was drafted this year to become that kind of a more dynamic pass-catching running back that you can actually split out wide and run as an underneath wide receiver. So to me, it's not that he doesn't have the potential to do it. It's that if Buffalo's offense is just as high-powered, if not more than last year, but you're talking about, including Gabe, you're talking about legitimately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 7. Now you get Devin Singletary there as well. You have like 7 mouths to feed here, which it's going to be whoever gets open. It's going to be whoever the quarterback knows can make that play. Is it going to be Gabe Davis? I don't think he's the primary guy just yet. He has potential. For me personally, having him in that 40 range is mainly because I think that, Stephon Diggs is always going to be their guy, but I feel that a lot of that target concept is, again, it's going to be different guys that kind of cannibalize each other a little bit. But give it some time. But I think pump the brakes maybe for one more season on Gabe Davis. Now, in a year or two from now, yes, maybe he has that potential.
Fair enough. All right, we're going to move on to DeAndre Hopkins. I have him ranked at wide receiver 35. You have him all the way down at 54. He's currently going at wide receiver 34, right ahead of where I have him. I know that there's the argument can be made about the fact that Arizona went out and traded for Marquise Hollywood Brown. Obviously, the fact that he's got a 6-game suspension, which is going to hinder his overall performance and fantasy finish on the year. So, he may not even finish as the wide receiver, 34, 35. But I think if Hopkins wasn't sitting out the first 6 weeks, he'd be a top 10 wide receiver. I know that he's a little bit older now. He's, just over age 30, but he hasn't seemed to slow down at all. He just keeps being a completely dominant wide receiver when he's on the field. And I believe he'll still give you some week winning performances when he gets back from the suspension. Really, with Hopkins, for me, the reason that I'm willing to take him, where he's going or right around where he's going is kind of league dependent for me. So with Hopkins, my strategy is kind of simple. If you have an IR spot and you can keep him in that spot while he's suspended, then I think that you should draft him, right about where he's going as like a second flex player. Like he should probably be the first player that you put on your bench at those wide receiver running back positions. Is somebody that's flex eligible. Put him in your IR for those first 6 weeks. After the draft, you can pick somebody else up. And as long as you go into the first, let's say week 7 and you're, not 0-6 or 1-5, if you're at least 2-4 or better, I don't think that that's something that's too hard to overcome to make the playoffs. And in fantasy football, it's not really about being the best team for the entire season, unless you're in like a total points league or something like that, in which case I don't suggest drafting anybody that's going to be suspended for any number of games, unless it's, maybe less than 3. But in a normal, head-to-head fantasy football league, Hopkins gives you an advantage once he gets back, which as long as your team makes the playoffs, you have a huge advantage going into the playoffs because you now have a top 10 wide receiver, maybe even, higher than top 10. I mean, if you look at DeAndre Hopkins finishes, whenever he's played, basically a full season, at least in the last 5 years, he's been a wide receiver 5 overall or better 4 of the last 5 years. The only year that he didn't was last year, obviously, when he had, missed games due to injury. But even still, last year what did he play? 10 games that he played last year, he still averaged 12.5 points per game. And that's in basically 9 games because the week 8 game that he got injured in, he only played 25% of the snaps. So he's got league winning potential late. It's just a matter of, can your team sort of hold out and win enough games early in the season to allow Hopkins to come back and help you make that push for the playoffs. So I still think he's got value. He's going to be coming back in week 7 when, maybe some of these other wide receivers that you're drafting have already missed games or maybe missing games. Now I know, missing games for wide receiver isn't as common as a running back, but maybe you go with a 3 running back build in your, let's say you're in a standard 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. If you go running back the first 2 rounds, let's say, you pick up some decent guys like, DeAndre Swift and Alvin Kamara. And these 2 guys are like your stable running backs. And then you grab a couple of wide receivers on your way back, or maybe even another running back somewhere in there. And then you grab your wide receiver. So you're going to have a running back in your flex. At this point, you'll have 3 running backs and 2 wide receivers on your team. I don't mind grabbing DeAndre Hopkins there because now what you're doing is basically you're insuring against any injury to those top 5 guys that you just made, assuming that those injuries don't happen in the very beginning of the season while Hopkins is still out. But if at any point later on in the season, any of those 5 guys who you project to be starters for your team goes down, you just flip-flop your roster around and you put DeAndre Hopkins in one of those spots, whether it's wide receiver, whether it's flex, whatever the case is. He just gives you a lot of flexibility once he gets back, and he's a solid piece in your lineup. So I don't have any problem with people drafting DeAndre Hopkins up at 34 or even higher. If, like I said, if you have a build like that where you're getting through your first 5 rounds and you have your running back, wide receiver, and flexes locked up.
To me, I feel like it's a little bit more of, he's hit age 30. He's been in the league 9 years. He's coming off a legitimate knee injury, and the suspension of losing those 6 games, I think it's going to be a big factor. I mean, you're losing arguably a third of the season to draft somebody. Some people are going to look at that name and it's, oh my God, it's Nuke. It's DeAndre Hopkins. He's out there. I got to take him. Like, where before, we talked in the first series of wide receivers, and my thing was, if a guy's out there, I might grab him based on value versus not and things like that. That's one thing. I mean, to me, I feel like that is, you're talking about a guy that's considered a top 20, top 25 wide receiver that falls 3 rounds past where he should be taken. And I'm not an ADP guy. I don't follow that to the letter. I'd rather go get my guys first and then see if anybody shakes out. But if that's the case, then that's fine. But I think, I'm guilty of living in the past, just like a lot of other people. And I think that they look and go, well, it's DeAndre Hopkins. You see that name and it's there. Now, the point you made, Pat, 100%. If you're able to get him on the cheap and be able to stash him on your bench and keep him there as an insurance policy, whether it even be trade bait down the road for a league mate that's really interested in picking him up, that maybe is acceptable. I just think finish wise for him, I think there's going to be a little bit too much going on. It's hard to tell what Arizona might try to do. Obviously, yes, you got Marquise Brown coming in, who is a young, hungry wide receiver. We saw flashes of his potential with, an offense that didn't really air it out with Baltimore. Not for nothing. It was what it was. You have Rondale Moore, who really impressed in flashes. You say boom bust. Okay. He was just getting used to the league. And I think that coaching staff sees the potential that he has overall. Now, speaking of vacated targets, obviously Christian Kirk went by the wayside, and he eventually became the wide receiver one, so to speak, mostly because of the Hopkins injury. Yeah, after week 10, we saw that kind of trail off. At the end of the day, you did lose that many targets. AJ Green probably not going to get his 92 that he got last year. That's for sure. And then after that, there's just, it's like, okay, so does Brown slide into Kirk's role? Okay. So then you're talking about 92 targets, and you got Rondale Moore and Hopkins, ironically, albeit, both didn't play the entire season. One mainly limited because of injuries, but they both finished with 64 targets on their team. And Rondale Moore is a pretty good receiver of the football. Didn't have a lot of drops or anything crazy going on last year, and has that big playability where, of course, now everybody calls it the Deebo Samuel role. It's the reverse Le'Veon Bell role. Instead of a running back that you use as a wide receiver, now it's a wide receiver you use as a running back. It's chicken or chicken. It's the same thing. It's keeping the defense honest by putting a guy out there, and then they're spying them, and you got to make sure that they're rotating their defense to adjust accordingly. To me, the biggest question on that whole thing is going to be the quarterback, Kyler Murray. We've seen Kyler Murray look borderline MVP level. And we've seen Kyler Murray look like a kid who got beat up for his lunch money and didn't want to go back to school. He just signed his big contract, and there was a little hullabaloo about his dedication to studying film and all that crap. And that was what it was. Last year, Pat, when we were talking about offenses and fantasy football, I was with you. We were in the first couple of weeks, we were all in on Arizona. It's like, can I get Arizona's offensive coordinator and right guard on my roster somehow, because that's just how many points you were going to get with them. This year, I'm not as high on that team as a whole because I really don't know what to expect with a lot of moving parts. Should they be high flying? Yeah, they should. DeAndre Hopkins isn't going to be a part of that. So I think having him, winding down, not so much his career, but again, they'll be able, I believe next year, they'll be able to make some moves if they needed to get out from his contract a little bit and try to maybe get into some trades or anything to see how this goes. So for me, it's more of that. It's the question mark around Hopkins. I believe, just taking a quick peek, that, if they were to, after June 1st next year, if they were able, even if they just released them, they would save themselves like $19 million in cap. So if things don't work out this year, he could be quietly phased out of the offense. Not completely. Obviously, if they're challenging for a playoff spot and everything else, does he come back and be their true wide receiver one? Sure. But if things are clicking with AJ Green and Rondale Moore and, Hollywood Brown and your tight end, Zach Ertz, and you drafted Trey McBride with some upside, you got James Conner. If those things are going well and they're running well without it, it could turn into those, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it types of things.
Makes sense. Let me ask you this. So I just looked up DeAndre Hopkins' average draft position. Where's your first pick in our draft in our league of record?
Well, let's see.
Are you in the 7th round or?
I have to pull the chart up. No, I am in the 9th round.
Oh, okay.
So yes, he could be available to me.
He's going right now, PPR leagues. He's going 705, so he'll probably be gone before you get a shot. But I was actually going to ask if let's just assume that your first pick was in the 7th round and Hopkins was left on the board. Is he a guy that has enough upside for you that you would consider taking him, or because you're drafting, because you're missing so many of those top picks, or will you just bypass him altogether and not even bother taking a shot with him? Because you have to find talent at that point in the draft. Like that's this is how you're going to have to build your team in our league of record this year.
Oh, no doubt. Again, I've had, I think, 7th round, 8th round where, those are my first picks. I mean, albeit having a keeper or two, we do have a little bit of wiggle room where if you choose to keep only one keeper, that gets you a compensatory pick at the end of the 2nd round. So in a sense, you have one of the first picks of the 3rd round, and we're in a keeper league. So albeit some people keeping 2 players, in theory, we're already 2 rounds behind when we start, give or take a player. Right. So you're talking maybe tops your first player is somebody in 25 to 30, let alone what you kept and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, it would really have to be who was around them. And for me, am I going to look at, okay, I'm looking at my season right off the bat and going, is this something that is going to, do I think I have a shot with the team that I picked? In theory, no. I mean, I'm going to look at it as a total tank rebuild type of year and things of that nature. I think that is probably a big part of things.
Let me ask you this to make it a little bit easier for you. So we're going to kind of transition this into the next wide receiver that we're going to talk about.
There's no question. Yeah, go ahead.
We have Hunter Renfrow going at ADP wide receiver 38. I have him 56. You have him up at 29. Obviously, you're much higher on him than you are on Hopkins. But again, in that situation where you don't have a pick until whatever the 7th, the 9th round, whatever it is. Are you looking to take the guy with the potential league-winning upside when he gets back like Hopkins, or are you like, I need to get some points on my roster and have somebody steady, and you're going to go with a guy like Renfrow? I mean, your rankings say Renfrow, but I know that rankings don't always necessarily match 100% with situation on where you're drafting people, because you could have a wide receiver ranked much higher, but if you've already drafted 4 wide receivers, you're kind of stuck looking at running back or quarterback or something like that on your team. So if you're in that position where Hopkins and Renfrow are both available with your first pick in our league of record, which way you going?
I would go Renfrow personally, and the reason being, I want some points to see what happens. Again, based on my roster and what everything shakes out like. I think let's see, was it this? There was the year. It was the one year I think I didn't have a pick until the 8th round, and I thought I could try to three-peat and pull that off, which would have been like damn near unbelievable. But I think the first pick I made was actually Jamison Crowder, if I'm not mistaken. And for me, it was like, you know what? Yeah, like I want to try to find the best player available, and I know maybe you're looking to spin this back into that concept. I can't pick a guy like that unless it was like, even if he's the best guy out there, I want somebody who's going to play for me right away, because if I'm looking to make any moves early, at least I have a guy there that gives me that much potential to make a move where, suddenly Hunter Renfrow through the first 3 weeks is a top 10, 15 wide receiver, let's say. Somebody's going to come knocking for him and go, hey, you suck, but I'll take him off your hands for a first-round pick. So suddenly, if things are starting to turn into that level of possibilities, then, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'll entertain that. And I don't think anybody's going to come calling for DeAndre Hopkins early. And again, I could be wrong. You may have somebody who's a stand out there that just lives and dies by the guy. But at the end of the day, now, talking about Hunter Renfrow, I like him a lot. I know some people don't. I know some people immediately look at the Devontae Adams effect and everything like that. And sure, I think that's definitely a big factor to maybe not be as high on him as if anybody was last year, or thinking that he's going to continue on in that, again, now I guess you'll call it the Cooper Kupp role, where he's just that much of a PPR wide receiver that makes those catches. But to see what he did for his team last year throughout, I think I'd have to take somebody along his lines like that. I mean, Hunter Renfrow in in our league of record finished as the 10th best wide receiver. Now, is he going to get his 128 targets that he got last year? Probably not, because of Devontae Adams. I would have to say I'd be very stunned to see that happen. Right now, I know with like Darren Waller, there's a lot of question marks regarding health, regarding contract, regarding a lot of things. And again, today's like, we still haven't gotten into the season, so you never know how that'll shake out. But when you look at the wide receiving core for Las Vegas and what happened last year, where you had the tragic situation involving Henry Ruggs, off field that took him out of the loop. You had Brian Edwards, who is now with the Falcons, who may try to resurrect his career there. Zay Jones has moved on to the Jacksonville Jaguars and is kind of like a sneaky pick for later in your drafts. I think he's a guy that has some potential to help you out there. So when you look at those, again, 1, 2, 3 players that are out of the league. So you're looking at 36, 59, that's 94, 976. So yeah, there's your Adams targets, arguably, in those 2 to 3 players right there. So now if you've moved on to that point and Adams gets that volume, the 150, 160 targets, you're still leaving that much open for Renfrow to probably get another 100 targets. I mean, I'm a little higher on that offense this year as a whole. I think having Josh McDaniels, who was a part of those Patriots glory days with Brady and Moss, now maybe not direct OC, but he was involved in that. So he knows how to make an explosive offense, and to have his Randy Moss and to have his Wes Welker at the same time. If he's able to balance that out with Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow, I think he's definitely got the potential to be high. Again, I have him in my top 30 because of the PPR factor. Now, if you're doing standard scoring, God love you. Obviously, yeah, then he's not anywhere, per se on that radar. But, to have 103 receptions, 1,000 yards, and he had 9 touchdowns, and he does catch the football. He's not a guy that is, captain drops. I just like it a lot. And I mean, I think Renfrow for me too is, like a kid, you have that safety blanket, so to speak. I think if, all things fall apart, you have a player of his ilk there that I think, Derek Carr is going to go, well, there's my guy. Even though he has a college rapport with Adams and, they've had training camp and stuff to go through, I totally think that he's on that level where, yeah, Adams definitely is going to be the main guy in that offense. And I think they're going to be a lot more wide open, things of that nature. Now, that's me with the upside concepts, but again, I have Renfrow just inside my top 30. You have him closer to almost outside your top 60. So that is probably one of our biggest. And I think ADP, which is listed as roughly 38. So you're even, you're pushing almost 25, 30 past that. What's your deal, man? Just not a fan?
Well, so obviously I listen to and read a lot of fantasy football stuff throughout the entire offseason. I try to stay up to date as much as I can. And, I was listening to another podcast back in like the March, April timeframe. I think it was like right before the draft. And I heard one analyst call another analyst crazy for not having Renfrow in their top 24 wide receivers in one of their early ranking shows. And even back then I was like, do people really expect Renfrow to come close to duplicating the season that he just had? Like, he was in the right place at the right time. That's basically what happened last year. He ended up being the de facto number 1 for Derek Carr because their wide receiver room was so bad that a tight end was leading the team in targets and had led the team in targets over the past 2 years. So it's not like, Renfrow wasn't there 2 years ago and Waller still led the team in targets. To me, it was just one of those things where once Waller went down last year, that's sort of when Renfrow took over. If you look at his scoring last year, half of the games that he finished in the top 24 among wide receivers were games where Darren Waller played less than 25% of the snaps or was completely out with an injury. And in the ones where he did finish as a top 24 with Waller, they were all because he scored touchdowns, and he barely just snuck into the top 24 in most of those games. So he didn't have a single game of 100 yards with Waller. His only 2 double-digit target games came with Waller out of the lineup. Add in Devontae Adams and potentially a healthy Darren Waller. Again, we'll see with what's going on with him with the contract. But even if Waller isn't back in time or not 100% or whatever the case is, you can see that Renfrow never sort of commanded those targets, beforehand. It was always Waller that was the one getting those. That pushes Renfrow down to basically the third option on this team at best. And while I do see that he's still going to be useful in this offense, I don't think there's any chance outside of injuries to either Adams, Waller, or both that he finishes inside of the top 40. Now, I will admit I'm probably too low as to where he will actually finish. But like I've said before, I rank players based on where I would draft them. And Renfrow is a guy that I just don't want on any of my teams. I'd rather take a high upside swing at that point in the draft at guys like, Alan Lazard or Chris Olave or even Kadarius Toney, like guys who could way outperform their ADP rather than a guy who could slightly perform better than, the wide receiver 38. Like if he finishes like as a wide receiver 35, like is anybody going to be like really surprised about that? Like, I don't know. I just, again, he's one of those guys who to me is not a high upside guy. I'm not ranking him at 56 because I believe that he's going to finish as the wide receiver 56. I'm ranking him there because there are so many other guys that when you get to that point in a draft where you're taking, again, you're taking bench players at this point where you're getting Hunter Renfrow. I want bench players who have the potential to crack my starting lineup and make me have to make a decision of like, oh crap, this guy, for example, DeAndre Hopkins, who's going right around him. When DeAndre Hopkins gets back, I'm gonna have a decision to make. Do I have to put Hopkins in my lineup now, or should I, if I'm winning games, should I keep rolling with the guys that got me there? Like I want to give me the hard decisions because that means I have a lot of guys who are scoring a lot of points. Whereas Renfrow, I think he'll have a game here, a game there where he's going to be, a potentially wide receiver 1, top 12 guy overall for that week. But with Adams there and, again, if Waller gets back on the field anytime soon, I can't see. We're hesitant to draft wide receiver 2s for teams. Like people are down on T. Higgins as talented as he is because everybody's like, oh, Jamar Chase is going to get more targets. So, I don't think T. Higgins is a top 10 guy. I know obviously we don't believe that, but I've heard it. I've read it. I've seen people pass on T. Higgins in drafts because they're like, oh, well, I'm not taking the number 2. Like if we're not taking a guy like T. Higgins, who's a number 2 on a terrific offense at, inside the top 10 wide receivers, just because he's technically the second option. How are we taking a guy like Hunter Renfrow, who's going to be, potentially the third or fourth option on his team and thinking that there's some potential for him to, finish as the wide receiver 11 like he did last year or the wide receiver 10, whatever it was. That's just, I want higher upside guys on my team. That's basically where I'm at as far as, these later picks.
So the 10th best wide receiver from last year, with some changes in the offense, you don't even feel is a starter on most teams for fantasy?
I don't think he's going to be this year. I just don't. I mean, listen, he'll be a starter for you if you want 9.5, to 13.5 PPR points for most weeks. And then again, if he scores a touchdown, maybe he does a little bit better than that. But I'm looking at the games last year where he didn't score a touchdown. 10 points, 8 points, 8.5, 5.1, 9.3. Score touchdowns there, back to no touchdowns, 5.5. Like all of these games, 4.7, all of these games where he didn't score. And like how many touchdowns do you think he's going to have? Like, yeah, okay, the Raiders offense is going to be better, but Waller's going to get his fair share of end zone targets as big as he is. Devontae Adams is going to get his share of end zone targets and red zone targets. I just don't see it. Listen, I think Hunter Renfrow is a decent football player. I'm not like trying to bash the guy or anything. He's a way better football player than I'll ever be. I get it. But when it comes to fantasy, I want guys who are going to have the opportunity, guys like, maybe the guy that we're going to talk about next in Chris Olave. Like, I would rather have Olave because there's the potential, like, we were talking about on the last episode where Michael Thomas doesn't come back maybe he isn't healthy, or maybe he isn't the same guy that he was before the injury. And now all of a sudden, Olave becomes like the number 1 on his team. Like I know Renfrow isn't going to be the number 1. Like I know it. I know from the fact that they got Devontae Adams and he's an all-world talent. And I know from the fact that he was on the team with Waller the 2 years prior and didn't lead the team in targets. So he wasn't their number one option either of those years either. The only reason he was the number one target last year was because Waller was hurt, because Henry Ruggs ended up missing the season, because Brian Edwards failed to become the wide receiver that the Raiders coaching staff hoped. Like, for me, he was a product of a great situation last year. And I don't think the situation is anywhere near the same. That's basically how I feel. I mean, I can't change the way that I think about the process. I get that other people have different views, and that's completely fine. And if you want to go ahead and draft Renfrow, go for it. I have no issue with that whatsoever. For me, it's not the type of guy that I'm looking for late in drafts. So let's move on to Chris Olave, because I think poor Hunter Renfrow got. We spent a lot of time. Well, I mean, listen, he's a guy that we should spend a lot of time on. I get it. He's a very polarizing wide receiver this year because of how he finished last year and because of the changes on the offense. But let's move on to Chris Olave. I have him ranked at wide receiver 45. You have him at 33, which is 10 spots higher than where he's actually going, which is the wide receiver 43. Why are you? What's your deal with Olave? Again, I just talked about him. I would take Olave before I took Renfrow. You have, Olave ranked much higher than ADP, so I guess you agree in some fashion. But what's your take on Olave this year, and how you feeling?
Well, I mean, part of the big deal for me is I don't know what to expect out of the offense and out of Michael Thomas, which I think even right now there's some questions about, is he going to be healthy? Is he going to make it through the season? Is he? I just really don't know. I mean, I know they said, okay, he looked kind of okay in preseason. Shit looked electric. And, you see all the big things coming back out again. And then after, missing all last season with ankle injuries, and, he got back into camp. Now you're talking about a hamstring. Like, if the guy doesn't want to be there, he shouldn't be there. Now, I think they drafted Chris Olave looking at there's probably a pretty good chance that he doesn't want to be there, and he might not be there. I mean, Michael Thomas right now is, to me, one of the most polarizing players in the league. He's got so much, like you say, whatever, potential. And I mean, a few years back, he was, just such an epic football player for his team, and for us in fantasy football. And then to see health and, maybe other things off the field that are holding him back with the injuries to really push him to that level. Like, I mean, he's going into 2022 with, to me, too many question marks. Chris Olave comes from a heavy pedigree of the Ohio State offense. I think a lot of people talked about his potential with that team as far as being a, best route runner, has the total package as far as a route tree goes, things like that. I like him. Again, you're drafting rookies based on potential. I like Olave a lot because of that. I think this crop of young wide receivers that came out, a lot of them went to the right situations. Again, to get a guy like Olave to sit down there with Jarvis Landry, a veteran who's going to show him all the dark arts of wide receiver, of, ways to get open quick, ways to do this, ways to do that, and knows that this kid's going to blow by most of the offenses in the league. You still got, your Traquan Smiths, your Deontay Hardys, Marquez Callaways are in the mix. Quietly, Jameis Winston was having a decent season until he got hurt last year and looked like he had potential to, possibly not become Drew Brees, but take over that offense. So I think there was that playing into it as well. Alvin Kamara, you're waiting to see maybe what shakes out on his level. I like Olave. I like him a lot, and I do. I like him right in that region of, if those two players, I know what you're going to say, if those two players were there for you to take, which one would you take? I think some of it would be depending on where I'm picking. Like, where's my team at so far? Again, if I'm talking like a basic redraft league and, you're talking of a 43 and a 38 respectively for Olave and Renfrow as far as ADP, I think it would just be a matter of what I maybe already have on my roster. Now, if I'm drafting in Dynasty, I think you'd probably have to go Olave right off the bat because of that. If it's a keeper league where you're drafting this guy fresh and you're willing to take some of that potential on and see what's there, I think, again, that's a big factor. But to me, the two of them together are borderline coin flips. Now, if somehow this was later in a draft or whatever the case may be, again, our league, we're already talking about being 2 rounds behind. Chris Olave might go, in our draft, Chris Olave might go, somebody might be a nut and go mid-second round, early third. And suddenly that blows his ADP up compared to what we're talking about. But I think that he's a good wide receiver. I think he's got the potential to become a really good wide receiver. Just a matter of what happens in that offense and a matter of what happens with Michael Thomas. Do they stick by their guy and wait for him to get healthy, or do they look to, possibly, who knows, maybe make a move? Again, at the end of 23, they can make some trades to try to get out from under some of his contract and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just, there's a lot of question marks with that whole offense. But I think Olave is one of those safer picks. You're kind of like right where everybody is. If he's there, I'll take him. If not, I'm not going to hurt myself. Would I move up to take him if things worked out right? Maybe, because I think that pack of wide receivers from this year, even with all the preseason hype or lack of hype, I think they're all kind of going to get kind of jumped on at kind of right around the same time.
Yeah, I feel like the Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson effect is definitely, and you see that this year. You see that rookie wide receivers are being drafted, a lot higher than they have been in the past, because I think everybody's looking for or hoping to get, a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase rookie season where, guy finishes in the top 5 or 6 wide receivers for that year. I don't necessarily think we have anybody this year who, really has the standout potential to do that. At least, nobody off the top of my head. I think, Drake London obviously probably going to see a ton of targets, and Marcus Mariota has actually looked pretty good in preseason. So, maybe Drake London has a shot to do something like that. For me, Olave, I do like the guy. Coming out of the our preseason stuff where we were looking at rookies before the NFL draft, he was definitely a guy who was impressive on film, but rookie wide receivers generally don't at least start out the season strong. You see some stronger finishes with guys like, Amon-Ra St. Brown last year. I think there was another guy another rookie wide receiver who had a strong finish to the end of the year, but I just can't think of the name off the top of my head. But anyway, these rookie wide receivers, they don't start out as sort of go-to guys on their offense. That sort of has to be worked in throughout, the rest of the season. And, for me, again, a guy like Olave is a guy who I like him. I'm not saying I won't draft him, but for me, I would much rather draft a guy who is going to have a boom start of the season. You know what I'm saying? A guy like a Rondale Moore or something like that, who could potentially benefit from DeAndre Hopkins being gone for the first 6 weeks, and then trade him for Olave later on as the two are sort of, the two ships are sort of passing in the night. I'll take the guy on the rise as opposed to the guy who, maybe losing targets when their superstar wide receiver comes back. So again, I'm not opposed to drafting Olave. I think I want to say I drafted in the league that we just did this past weekend. I drafted a rookie wide receiver or a rookie running back, maybe both, honestly. But it's one of those things where I don't go out of my way to draft rookies, but it's not any slight on Olave. It's just the fact that for the most part, rookie wide receivers just they're not hits. They're not huge hits, at least the first year. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have the potential. It's just, the odds are kind of not in his favor. So, all right. So the last guy that we're going to talk about is Christian Kirk. He's going as the wide receiver 47. I have him right there at 48. You have him up at 37. I've seen him ranked even higher than you have him at times, but does seem to be going a little bit later in drafts, and I'm interested to see why you have him at 37.
One of the biggest reasons is that he looks to be their, they paid him a lot of money to join their team and to be that wide receiver one. Again, I hate using those terms because it's all relative. They also signed Zay Jones, who I said was one of those potential guys on the backside there that could be something for your team possibly. Looking at different roster cuts. Looks like they no longer employ Laquan Treadwell. Just watching this kind of maybe happen on that roster. So if that's the case, then again, that just kind of firms things up. Traded yesterday was Laviska Shenault. He of 100 targets last year, 63 receptions, and 619 yards. Looking at the fact that he's on that offense, and I mean, last year was obviously a lost season for the entire franchise because of coaching and numerous other things. You're going to get Trevor Lawrence going into year 2 with Doug Peterson, who he likes his quarterbacks and he likes to groom them, and he's pretty good at it. Trevor Lawrence, I think a lot of people are. Well, not a lot of people. Some people think, yeah, he's a bust and everything else. Like what happened to that franchise last year was not anybody's particular fault. So you're vacating targets of 151 for Treadwell right off the bat. And Marvin Jones was getting volume at the beginning of the year, and then eventually teams just knew to cover him, and suddenly it helped to spread the football a little bit. At the end of the day, I think he's going to go out there and turn what he did last year was 77 receptions with Arizona, averaged about 12.8 a catch, and he catches the ball at a pretty high rate. He got about a 75% catch rate last year. So he's sure-handed amongst other things. I think that's a big factor, and I think that offense is going to be – can't be much worse. So, again, I think they're going to be a lot better, and I think you're going to see that team itself where, you're talking about a team that threw for – under 3,500 yards. I think that offense kind of clicks a little bit more this year. I think that quarterback, again, closes in on maybe about 4,000 yards with a little bit more happening. You have Travis Etienne helping to maybe lighten the load both in the running and passing game. I think that you're going to see a lot of different things happen there, but I think one of them is Christian Kirk maybe finally getting his comeuppance. He's going to be a good, probably wide receiver 1 for you. I really think so. I know sometimes he gets a little banged up, misses a game or two, but I think he has that ability to be that guy. Now, again, that's me just shooting the moon and figuring, hey, you're getting the best wide receiver in an offense that's starving for great wide receivers. Marvin Jones is definitely going to be there as a little bit of a safety blanket, so to speak. And again, you have another piece or two with like we said, with Zay Jones and what they do out of the backfield. Evan Ingram, I'm not sweating him too much. I mean, again, he never was really able to put it together with the Giants, and I don't see that maybe happening here. But again, I like Christian Kirk a little bit. Again, I'm not reaching to draft him. He's a guy I feel that could fall to you definitely. And again, if you're looking for those wide receivers down the road, I think it's one of those guys that not that you are targeting, but he's got to be on your radar knowing that he might slip a round or two because people are going to be a little light on him. Now, maybe less likely now that, again, that Chenault's gone and people start to recognize that they're kind of, rounding out who's going to be that starting receiving core and who's really going to make the plays for that team. But again, I know, Pat, you're almost dead on with ADP. It's not that you're not high on them. It's that you just don't expect anything big out of them, or you don't expect anything big out of that offense.
I mean, the offense still makes me a little bit nervous, but I think that, listen, teams make mistakes all the time. I just saw a tweet earlier that the Raiders are waiving Alex Leatherwood, the offensive tackle that they drafted in the first round last year, already off the team. So teams make mistakes. Paying Christian Kirk, I believe, was a mistake. I think he's a decent player. I'm not, again, this is not any slight on these guys as players. It's just, Kirk doesn't bring anything special. He's 5'11", 200 pounds. He's, standard sized wide receiver. He's not blazing fast. He has never really shown any propensity for being an excellent route runner. He's just been a decent guy when he's played, and which honestly he wasn't good enough to beat a lot of people out on Arizona's offense. I mean, he only averaged 6 targets a game last year. Never finished his career, short career, but never finished his career anywhere higher than the wide receiver 26 on the season. And, a lot of that, again, was last year because of DeAndre Hopkins missing time. They had to put Kirk in there. And I'm not saying that he's a bad player. I'm not saying that he couldn't, potentially do something. But, I mean, listen, last year we thought it was Laviska Shenault and Marvin Jones in that offense. And, as it turned out, ended up being like Jamal Agnew and all these guys that we just had no idea who else was, who Trevor Lawrence was going to throw the ball to. Now you have Travis Etienne coming back. Again, the departure of Chenault does do a little bit but Kirk was probably going to be their one anyway because of what they paid him. So I don't think Chenault leaving does too much as far as changing, what Christian Kirk's involvement in the offense was going to be. I think guys who, maybe were on that playing in the slot, where Chenault looked to be kind of slotted this year, whoever that fourth wide receiver is, will probably move up and become a little bit more valuable in fantasy. But again, like you said, with Evan Ingram, again, not a guy that I'm super high on by any means, but he is a talented guy. And sometimes, we see talented players all the time, especially recently on that Giants offense, who just were underutilized. There was bad quarterback play. There was bad coaching. Like Evan Ingram was a first round tight end. He was drafted. He had incredible, athleticism and measurables. And, again, I'm not saying that Evan Ingram is he's not like George Kittle or anything like that, but he's got the ability if given the opportunity. And we saw he had a really good season as a top 5 or 6 tight end his second year in the league. He's got the ability with a good quarterback to do that. So if Trevor Lawrence gets better, I do think that all of the as they say, a high tide raises all ships. I do think everybody in this offense could potentially get better and finish higher than where they're being drafted. If Trevor Lawrence, and Doug Peterson end up having a better offensive output than they did last year. But for me, like Kirk is he was just a guy. The fact that Jacksonville wants to make him more than that doesn't necessarily mean that he is. Is he going to see a ton of targets this year? Probably. I mean, yeah, it's inevitable that they're going to throw the ball. They're probably going to be behind. Their defense didn't improve that much by drafting who they draft with the first overall pick. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. The defender, whatever. But I don't think that their defense is going to be light years better than they were last year. It's just the fact that maybe the high passing volume brings him up a little bit. But again, he's not a guy that I'm willing to, there are other guys going in that same area where Kirk is going, where I would just rather take shots on, guys like Sky Moore or whatever, like guys who have the potential to play in a really, really good offense and be, we still have no idea who the number one is on the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it's Kelsey, obviously, but we don't know as far as wide receiver. So I would rather take shots on guys like that than a guy like Kirk, who, great, he might be the number one, but for the Jaguars, who haven't really impressed anybody in the last 8 or 9 years. So that's just, again, that's nothing against Kirk. I don't think that he's a game changer at the wide receiver position.
No, not a game changer. That was Trayvon Walker, by the way.
There you go. Thank you.
Defender. Right. Yes. First overall pick. How soon we forget.
We talk offensive players in fantasy football. These defensive guys, I don't even remember what numbers they are half the time.
No, I know what you mean. He's not jumping out at you. It's more of maybe you feel like if you tier your wide receivers, not that I go so much that route, but I mean, you do see certain lists that do that. And it's, if he's the worst guy at the end of, let's say, tier 5 or 6 of wide receivers, and he's somehow sitting there, but you're trying to get guys on the front or back end of a run. Yeah. And there's definitely going to be guys out there with more potential. Again, if you gave me Olave, okay, right now, if you said like keep, trade, cut, Olave, Renfrow, Kirk, overall, I'm keeping Olave, I'm trading Renfrow, I'm cutting Kirk. So, you know what I mean? And again, the keep trade could even go back and forth depending on what my roster looks like. But yeah, do I want him on my team if I can get him? Yeah. Am I going to kill myself to do it? No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel too. I'm not saying I won't take him. I'm just saying, he's not the type of guy that I'm necessarily looking for. There's a point in a draft where every player becomes a value no matter who they are. It's just a matter of, for me, Kirk would probably have to drop a little bit lower than where he's currently going in order for me to be like, yeah, all right, I'll take him over, these other guys, because I do think there is potential there for him to, potentially have 135 targets and finish with 80 plus receptions and over 1,000 yards. I think that's a possibility, of course, but I learned last year that taking, even potential number one wide receivers, running backs, whatever, from bad offenses just generally is not a good strategy. And so I tend to stay away from offenses that have proven to be bad until they prove me otherwise. And then, like I said, that was the case I was making with like the Sky Moore thing. Like, I know the Kansas City Chiefs offense is going to be good because they have Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Eric Bieniemy still the offensive coordinator there. I know that their offense is going to move the ball. So I'd rather take a shot on a guy like Sky Moore or MVS, for example, over a guy like Christian Kirk, who, he's going to be the number one, but how good is their offense going to be? That's just kind of where I'm at with him. But there does come a point, like I said, for everybody where he becomes a valuable pick. All right, well, that rounds out our top 50 and some of the guys that we wanted to talk about here as far as where our differences are on ADP. I think, hopefully that gives you, I think we give you a little bit of pros and cons for all the guys that we talk about, and in most cases anyway. So hopefully that helps you make your decisions. Fantasy football is, as much as you need a list or a ranking sheet or something like that when you do your draft, or even an app. Now they have apps where you can have players ranked. You have to make your own calls on guys. You can't just go off of a sheet. I mean, you can. That's completely fine, I guess, if that's what you want to do. But the whole fun of fantasy football, like we talked about in our last episode, the whole fun of it is making bets on guys and calling your shot and taking the guys that you like in the hopes that you're right and you'll win your fantasy league. If you're a Christian Kirk fan, if you think that Trevor Lawrence is going to really bounce back and have a great year, go ahead and draft him. All more power to you. And I hope you're right. I just know that unless he falls a little bit, he's not going to be on my team. And a lot of these guys, like I said, we're higher or we're lower on ADP. That's fine. That's what makes these drafts fun, is that, you see a guy who is ranked a little bit further down the list, and then all of a sudden one of your league mates grabs, and you're like, wow, it seemed like a reach, but man, I was going to reach, a couple picks later to do the same thing. So it's all about getting together with the people that you're with and drafting and sort of playing the game of, can I grab this guy now? Can I wait? Who's this team going to draft? And in some cases, even, we make some trades at our draft sometimes. So there are some intricacies as far as draft trading and things like that happen in some of these drafts as well. So it's definitely, this is the sort of the chess match of fantasy football is the draft. And then throughout the season, it's about, making sure that you're starting and sitting the right guys, which we will be here for, all of our start sits again this year, the way we did last year, helping you guys make sure that you're picking the right players for your lineup. Also want to just take a second to let you know that if you want to follow us on social media, we do put out some information, some random stats that we find, or just some funny, Scott's like the king of the funny meme tweets. If you want to follow either of us on social media, we are at the 9Route1 and at Scott from Delco. And with that, Scott, you got anything before we head out?
No, man, I think you kind of hit everything. Mickey's, definitely want to say thank you to one of our friends of the show. I know it's local for you, Pat. Sometime I got to try to get down there and say hello to the gentlemen and ladies that are over at Mickey's down there. And
we'll get you some Mickey's tots when you come for the draft. Those things are unbelievable, man. Yeah, they're like covered in like cheese, like beer cheese, and I think they come with like pulled pork on them. Oh my God, they're phenomenal.
Maybe they could top me in the same. But no, all kidding aside, we do appreciate that. And, beyond that, again, we're looking forward to an exciting season. We got a draft coming up this weekend. We're also looking forward to, and then we're going to get into it, probably look to get involved in our start sits, see what the lay of the land is, and move on throughout the season, trying to give you that deep dive into the knowledge to help take you deep into your fantasy football season and hopefully steer you towards a title. So we appreciate you listening. Please, like and subscribe. And again, let us know that you're listening. And if you like anything else mentioned in content, again, you can email or contact Pat or myself at the addresses we just listed. And, look forward to hearing from you soon, folks. Peace.